We're okay? We'll start? Okay. So, good afternoon. I am Chanad Shiklosh, Associate Director of IRIS NRC. Thank you so much for attending today. I'd like to start first of all by acknowledging our co-sponsors for this event. Based at Indiana University's Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies, the Center for the Study of Global Change is an alliance of scholars, educators, researchers, and graduate and undergraduate students who are committed to advancing global studies and international education at Indiana University and across the nation and the world. The center is making a systematic, sustained effort to infuse global perspectives into learning at all levels, from pre-kindergarten through graduate school and beyond. I encourage you all to explore their website, connect with them on social media, sign up for newsletters. Our second co-sponsor is the Center for South Asia at UW-Madison. CSA serves as an intellectual hub to promote the generation of new knowledge about and collaborative intellectual inquiry in South Asia. The center provides support for the curricular and co-curricular activities of UW faculty and staff by hosting lectures, exhibitions, film series, reading groups, language tables, and other events that enhance the academic offerings on South Asia. It also identifies and supplements areas of academic and outreach need by hosting regular lectures, K-12 workshops, colloquia, and teacher training on the region. Again, I encourage you all to explore their website, connect with them on social media, sign up for their newsletters. I'd like to acknowledge my two colleagues, Carmen Pitts and Essie Lenchner. Carmen, thank you for all your work in preparing this event. Essie Lenchner will be on tech support today. If you have any issues, please do reach out to her directly. This event is being recorded, but you will only show on the recording if your microphone is on. In the meantime, please feel free to enter any questions in the chat at any point, and we will go through them in the Q&A. I'd like to take a moment. This is a significant thing. I'm going to read the UW-Madison Land Acknowledgement Statement. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejob since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Ellie Cohen to our book club for today. Dr. Cohen is a Postdoctoral Fellow in International Issues and Sustainable Development at Indiana University. Her research centers on education in developing contexts with a particular focus on education in areas of crisis and conflict. In her service and teaching, she supports the incorporation of global and sustainability-related content and across the educational pipeline, K-16, using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework. Dr. Cohen has taught preschool, elementary, high school, and college students in the United States, Morocco, and Jordan. Welcome, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. It's so nice to see you all here. So today we are going to be talking about using literature to explore the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 on quality education. So here is kind of our plan for today. We're going to start with a real kind of macro overview of what are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, just so that we are all on the same page. And then we'll look specifically at SDG 4 on quality education. And then we'll shift into talking about using literature to teach the SDGs. And then finally, we'll get to the specific books that hopefully you were able to look at for today. And those books were dependent on your grade level that you teach, but for younger grades, we're talking about Malala's Magic Pencil. For middle grades, we're talking about Serafina's Promise. And for high school age, we're talking about The Girl with the Louding Voice. And I do hope that you were able to read them, or at least part of them, because they're all phenomenal books. So I want to go ahead and start by asking this question: what are the SDGs? And I'm actually going to invite you to pull up the chat and answer this for me. If you are familiar with them, what do you know about the SDGs? All right, not much. Karen says there's 17 goals from the UN. Great, and Danielle says there are 17 of them, and that they're a roadmap developed by many nations to reach sustainability by 2030. Awesome. So this sounds like some of you have some familiarity with them. Some of you are going to learn a lot more about them. So I actually want to start, rather than hearing from me what they are, you're going to hear from a bunch of celebrities a little bit about the SDGs.
We can be. We must be the first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation
Most determined
to fight injustice and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done. The global goals
a 15-year plan
for everyone, everywhere.
with no one left behind.
We will live in a world
Where nobody
Anywhere lives in extreme poverty. Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one
Wakes in the morning
asking if there will be food today. We will live in a world where no child has to die.
Diseases we know how to cure. And where proper health care
Is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
Everyone goes to school
And education gives us the knowledge.
and skills.
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities to thrive
And be powerful.
and safe.
We cannot succeed if afterwards.
we will live in a world
where all people can get clean water.
And proper toilets
At home,
at school and at work.
we will live in a world where there's sustainable energy for everyone
heat, light.
and power for the whole planet.
without destroying the planet.
We will live in a world where economies prosper.
A new wealth.
Lead to decent jobs
For everyone.
And we will live in a world
where our industry
Our infrastructure and our
Best innovations.
are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
we will live in a world
where prejudices and extremes of inequality are defeated.
Inside our countries,
And between different countries.
where people live in cities and communities
That are safe, progressive,
Support everyone who lives there.
where we replace
What we consume. Planet where we put back what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back
the
from
threat of climate change.
where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas.
Restore and protect
life on land,
Forests.
animals,
The earth itself.
with peace between and inside countries.
Where all governments are open.
And answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
with everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people.
Work together.
Partnerships of all kinds. To
Make these global goals a reality.
These are the United Nations global goals.
For sustainable development.
Let's get to work.
So that provides us with a little bit of an overview of what the 17 goals are. And here you see them in front of us. And so, as I think one of you mentioned, these are goals that were put forth by the United Nations as a blueprint for achieving peace and prosperity for people and the planet. And so they are a blueprint, right? They are kind of guidelines or approaches to achieving peace and sustainability. So before I go further, I want you to take a minute, again, open the chat box and take a look at these goals and just let us know which one of these stands out to you the most, which one really resonates with you, or which would be your priority. So for me, I just put in the chat, it's goal 4 on quality education. Thanks, Essie. She says goal 10 on reduced inequalities. Danielle says that they're so interconnected that they all have equal weight. That is very insightful, and we'll talk about that interconnection soon. Someone said goal 10. Amy said quality education. Awesome. Andrea also says reduce inequality. Karen also is pointing out they're so overlapped and intertwined, but poverty and hunger seem like a first step. Great. So just to, so the goals, as you heard in the video, were put forth in the year 2015 after a multi-year consultative, collaborative global process to develop them. And so it was an extensive process that included both like high-level meetings with government officials, as well as on the ground, door-to-door surveys around the world to hear from people on what are their priorities, what do we need to include in this massive roadmap, right, for getting to some sort of sustainability, right, some place of sustainability. And so they were put forth in the year 2015 to be achieved by the year 2030. And they come out of the United Nations, and all 193 member states of the UN have signed on to them, saying, endorsing them and saying we are committed to achieving these. Although we can talk about critiques of the SDGs later, but they are non-binding. So we can kind of take this commitment with a grain of salt in some cases. So here we go. I already told you all of this. What are the SDGs? So a little bit about how we got to the SDGs. Prior to 2015, the UN had put forth these 8 goals called the Millennium Development Goals. And this was really the first time that the world set out these global goals. But the Millennium Development Goals were really only targeting the quote unquote developing world. And as you can see, there are only 8 of them. They were critiqued for being rather limited in scope. So for example, if you look at goal 2, it's achieve universal primary education. Right, so there are questions about why only primary, why not all education, for example. So they were limited in scope, they were limited in expanse, right? People were asking, why are we only trying to achieve these goals in developing or low income countries, right? It's not as if, quote unquote, developed countries or higher income or industrial countries have achieved all these things. And there was also a fairly limited buy-in, right? They weren't developed through the same extent of consultation that the Sustainable Development Goals were. So 2015 came, we clearly did not achieve all of these goals, and the SDGs were launched. So the SDGs are built on the traditional framework of sustainability, which you see here on the bottom right-hand corner, which are these 3 pillars, right? we think about economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability all together make up big S, capital S sustainability. And what the SDGs did was actually expand that framework in a couple of ways. So we still see these social, sorry, this should say environmental, and this should say economic. All right, we still see social, environmental, and economic sustainability, but they are expanded, right? So here, this idea of social sustainability is to end poverty and hunger in all forms and ensure dignity and equality. This piece here on economic prosperity, or what they call prosperity, which is kind of aligns with economic sustainability, is this idea not only of prosperity economically and financially, but also to ensure fulfilling lives that are in harmony with nature, right? And I think that idea of fulfilling lives and meaningful lives is really interesting and a little bit new. And then environmental sustainability is defined here as protecting our planet's natural resources and the climate, not only for us today, but for future generations. But then they also add these two other components of sustainability. One here is peace, right? That in order to have a sustainable and peaceful planet, we have to foster peace, justice, and inclusion. And then finally, partnerships. So implementing the agenda through a solid global partnership. And I think we can think of partnerships even beyond, nation to nation partners, but really think holistically and comprehensively of, on the ground partnerships, or public-private partnerships, or partnerships between student and teacher to achieve these goals, or between school and community to achieve these goals. But this idea that we really can't achieve these goals alone. And to the points that others made about the interconnection of these goals, I think another important piece of partnership here is that we also have to recognize not only how the goals themselves are interconnected, but how what happens in certain places are also connected. And what I mean by that is that, our recycling here in the United States gets shipped off to Malaysia, right? And then has a drastic impact on the environment there and quality of life. And I teach a class on this, and we just watched a small clip from John Oliver, who did an episode, I don't know, a few months ago, I think, about plastics. Anyways, he used that example of our plastics being shipped off to Malaysia. And then he had an interview with a woman in Malaysia who was talking about how they burn the plastics, and that impacts their air quality. So not only are the goals connected, but also places are connected. And so we need partnerships for all of that. A couple of other things that I think are really important about the goals broadly, and we heard this in the video when they said that the goals are for everyone, everywhere, with no one left behind, right? So they are inclusive, they are for everyone. And that means, boys and girls, that means marginalized populations, urban, rural. They're really meant to be for everyone, right? With no one left behind. But also they are integrated, which is what some of you have already pointed out, that we can't address one without getting at the other. So for example, we can't have high quality education if children are hungry, right? We have to address goal 2, which is hunger, and goal 4. But also we can think about the ways that as we address goal 4 around quality education, we may also be having a positive impact on goal 8 on economic growth and something about employment. Sorry, I'm forgetting the exact terminology. But we can also think about how there might be negative interactions too. And one example of that might be that as we reach goal 9 on industry and innovation, we may have a negative impact on goal 13 around climate change. Similarly, there have been people who question, can we have economic growth without negatively impacting the environment? And then finally, these goals are universal, right? And I think that's also really important. These are no longer goals just for developing countries, right? These are goals that we need to be addressing here in the United States. These are goals that need to be addressed in all industrialized societies. And I love this example. So there is a lot of work being done around the SDGs in Europe, so much so that I don't know if you ever saw that movie Yesterday. I think it was called Yesterday. It was about this like boy or young man who was a like kind of a struggling singer songwriter, and then there was some like global blackout, and when everyone came to, like when electricity was returned or something, he was the only one who remembered the Beatles, right? So then he like went around the world pretending he had written all these songs. It's a cute movie if you haven't seen it, but the point is that one of the supporting characters was this woman who was a teacher in England, and they show like just a random clip of her classroom of her teaching, and you see on her bulletin board, she has a poster of the SDGs, right? It is just so commonplace in many parts of Europe that people know what the SDGs are. And similarly, I was on a trip in India a couple years ago, and people just talk about the SDGs. And I bring all this up because that is not the case here in the US, right? Lots of people have never heard of the goals, but in fact, they are universal, and we do need to be taking action on these issues here in our own countries and states and cities and towns. So I want to shift a little bit and start talking about SDG 4. And I want to do that by telling you a little bit about what I like to call the anatomy of a goal. And this is one thing to think about as you are thinking about bringing the SDGs into your classrooms. You can talk about them just at the level of the goals, right? You can introduce your students to these 17 goals that are these 17 global challenges that the world has come together to address. And we're going to talk about quality education, and we're going to read these books about it, and we're going to do this project, and but you might find yourself asking, what do we mean by quality education? Like, that is a big goal. It's very broad. So that's really nice from an educational standpoint, because you can link those in all sorts of ways to your standards. You can take those in all different directions in your classroom. But it's, as a policy, it's very broad. And so there we go. Under each goal are targets. And there are 17 goals. There are 169 targets. And so these are the targets for goal 4. And I'll actually show you what all those icons stand for later. But it is nice that they have these icons. They make them really user-friendly for the classroom. And I've seen a lot of lessons where teachers are cutting these up and letting students, manually kind of manipulate and move them around. But so, for example, target 4.1 is free primary and secondary education. So one of the, one piece of quality education is free primary and secondary education. And so again, there's this nice icon with this kind of little pithy summary. And then you can actually go to the text, and it says, by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. So unlike the Millennium Development Goals, which were really focused on getting kids access to education, right, and measuring enrollment rates, this target actually says we're going to get all kids, all boys and girls, in completely free education, in completely free primary and secondary education. Not only is it going to be free, but it's going to be equitable and it's going to be of high quality. That will lead to relevant and effective learning outcomes. So there's actually a lot in that target. So you can get, especially with older kids, you can get to the target level as you're doing this work. And then below the targets are indicators, and there are 230 indicators. And an indicator is essentially how we know that we've met these targets. So someone who's measuring how are we doing on target 4.1 would measure the proportion of children and young people in grades 2 and 3 at the end of primary and at the end of lower secondary who are achieving at least a minimum proficiency in reading and mathematics as aggregated by sex. So we'd look at all these statistics to see how are boys and girls doing in reading and math at the end of primary, lower secondary, and in grades 2 and 3. So here are all the targets for goal 4. And you can see they are vast, right? So we have free primary and secondary education, as well as equal access to quality pre-primary education, equal access to affordable technical, vocational, and higher education. Here, increasing the number of people with relevant skills for financial success. Target 4.5, eliminate all discrimination in education. Target 4.6 is universal literacy and numeracy. 4.7 is what we're doing right now, which is education for sustainable development and global citizenship. And then 4A is about building and upgrading inclusive and safe schools. 4B, expanding higher education scholarships for developing countries. And 4C, increasing the supply of qualified teachers in developing countries. So this gives us a much more detailed understanding of what we mean by quality education. And so these can be a really useful tool in the classroom as well. And again, you can cut these out, you can have kids move them around. You could have them come up with their own definitions of this. But you could also stay at the level of the target, the goal itself. Okay, so I just did a lot of talking. Before I shift on to this next question of, so what, who cares, why are you telling me all of this? Are there any questions? And there will be time for a Q&A later, but I just want to make sure everyone is with me. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so now the question is, so what, right? What do I do with all of this? You just told me about these policies, right? Because these are at their core a policy document. What does this have to do with me and my teaching, and how do I do this? So why might you want to teach with the Sustainable Development Goals if I haven't convinced you already? There are a couple of reasons I think that make them really compelling. One is that they are a great tool for making local and global connections, and you can do that in a couple of ways. One is, showing students, by showing them these 17 goals, and these are global goals that everyone is striving towards, it puts our work in a global framework. So even if you want to focus on your own community, which I think is absolutely important, you can still do so and in a book, that takes place in Nigeria or Haiti or Pakistan, and let's compare, right? What did the characters, what was education like, or what were their goals for education in those places and those characters, and how do we see it here? I also just got a notice that my internet is unstable, so I apologize for that if I cut out for a second. Hopefully I'm still with you and you're still with me. Okay, second, using the goals can cultivate empathy and a sense of global understanding, right? As you're making these global connections, students can see, right? These problems are challenges we have here. They're challenges we have all around the world. And I think, and we'll get at this more in a minute, using literature is an amazing way to not only make those connections, but help students really develop empathy for the characters, right? And understand that these goals aren't just policies, they're not just words, they lead to real experiences, right? They are the result of real experiences. And those real experiences manifest differently in different parts of the world. A third thing about these goals that I think make them really compelling in the classroom is that they are real, right? So you can use them for real problem-based and solutions-focused activities. And I have seen across grade levels, and I'm talking first grade, fifth grade, high school, everything in between. I have seen teachers have their students do really amazing inquiries, right? And student-led inquiries into what are the problems and how do we address them? So for example, I worked with a class of fifth graders, and each fifth grader selected a goal to research in a particular country, and then they had presentations. But anyways, there are great things that you can do with them because these are real life problems that we're talking about. And connected to that, and I think what I have seen a lot of teachers really enjoy is that they inspire and empower students, right? These are real problems, and we can help students find tools and strategies to address them and to learn about them, whether in your home community or in partnership with another part of the world. And I am just gonna warn you that my daughter just came home, and there's a possibility that she might come up and say hello to everyone, but she's delightful. All right, so now we've gotten all the background. Here she is. How and why do we use literature to teach about all the goals and specifically goal 4? So like I said, I think books are a really powerful way to take students beyond a policy, to show them how these issues like quality education impact the daily lives of children and youth, right? Sorry about that. So what do these goals look like? What does life look like in other parts of the world that make these goals necessary? And so I like to think about literature as being a window, a mirror, a sliding door, and a prism. So what do I mean by that? As a window, the literature provides us a window into new ideas and different views on the world, right? And I think that's something we kind of acknowledge, right? It's a window into another part of the world. But it's also a mirror, right? For some students, they actually see themselves and their own experiences in literature, right? And we know that that's why it's really important to be including multicultural and global literature in your classroom to, so that everyone sees themselves in the literature. But also, even for students who don't necessarily see themselves, right? They're not Malala, but they can see how their own experiences are mirrored in in this global human experience. And then literature can be a sliding door, right? So as students are seeing into this world, seeing how they could be a part of it, we try to encourage them to open that door, right? And see themselves as a part of this world, right? Sure, Malala's in Pakistan, and I forget the main character, Serafina, is in Haiti, and the character in The Girl with the Louding Voice is in Nigeria, sure, but we can see how we are a part of that world. We are a part of the world, right? And our actions, we are perhaps implicated in some of the things that are happening in the books, but we also have agency, right, to influence these things. And then finally, literature can be a prism, right? By showing these daily experiences, by analyzing them through the lens of the goals, books refract the complexity of global issues and help students to engage critically with these ideas. So, all right, hopefully you are still with me. And again, I'm going to tie this now to our books, right? Here they are. After, several slides, these are the books that you all read. I really hope you enjoyed them. I really, really love all of these books. And just because I know you haven't read all of them, so Malala's Magic Pencil is this really delightful picture book where Malala dreams about having this magic pencil that she would use to solve problems. But it's really nicely tied into what she sees in her childhood of girls leaving school and the challenges that children face in accessing education, and then also how she uses her education and her voice to make a difference. Serafina's Promise is based in a poor rural community in Haiti and features this young girl, Serafina, who is determined to go to school and study and become a doctor despite a myriad of obstacles that she faces. And then finally, The Girl with the Louding Voice is a coming of age story of a young woman in Nigeria, and goes through, you see all the challenges she faces in a really patriarchal society, and how she strives for education and how she perceives the role of education would be in her life. Like I said, they're all phenomenal. I think Malala's Magic Pencil could be used at any grade level. I think adults, I highly recommend everyone read The Girl with the Louding Voice, and Serafina's Promise too. They're just great. Okay, so here we go. So going back to this idea of what books can do for us, here's an example, right? Here are some questions we can ask. So as a window, we can ask, what are the barriers, or what are the barriers that the characters in these books face in accessing education? And that gives us a window into all three of these books, right? It helps our students think about what is life like in this book. And I think it's important to emphasize that we're talking about these specific characters, right? None of these books are universal stories across any of these countries, right? Of course, Serafina is one character in one particular part of Haiti, and her experience is very different than others. But nonetheless, we can ask, what are the barriers? As a mirror, right, we can reflect this back to our own communities and say, what are the barriers to education in our community, right? And we can help students make those connections. It's not just poor places in other parts of the world that have challenges in accessing education. There are challenges in our own communities too. And then as a sliding door, we can help students open that door and say, what can we do about it? Right? And that's where these goals get to that inspiration and empowerment piece, right? What can we do about it? And that can lead to student-directed inquiry, to student project-based learning, to service learning, to all sorts of things. And then as a prism, we can also ask, what are the systems and structures in place that got us here? And this prism might be maybe better for older kids, but maybe not. I think that, you know, put in the right language, even younger kids can understand some of these systems and structures and how privilege and power work to shape some of these experiences. And right, you can also have students do their own inquiries. What are barriers to education elsewhere, right? And that can lead them down their own paths. So that's one kind of example. Another thing you could ask is, how do characters in this book view education? And right, you can mirror that to say, how do you view education? And how is education viewed in other parts of the world, right? Again, so you can start with the book, tie it to our own personal experiences, and then tie it broadly. You can also start, of course, with you. How do you view education? And then what did we see in this book? And what do we see elsewhere? And one other example that I wanted to show you, that this actually came from a PowerPoint that a colleague of mine, or a teacher that I worked with, a 5th grade teacher, did. So she worked with her kids last year on all the goals. And so she had this board with all the goals up on the board. And then every week they read a different book tied to different goals. So over here, if you can tell, this is The Water Princess. That's the only one I remember offhand. But then what they started to do was draw connections, right? So The Water Princess, yes, was about clean water, but it also connected to all these other things, right? So going back to those of you who said these goals are so interconnected, we can always start with goal 4 and then help our students build that, build those systems thinking skills to say, how are these connected beyond goal 4? Well, sorry, my slides are being slow, but this is my last slide that says, thank you so much, and what questions do you have? And we have a little bit of time, so I would love to actually open it up to hear your questions, but also hear how you all think that you might be able to bring goal 4 and these books into your own classroom spaces. So I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and do some questions. There we go.
Dr. Cohen, thank you so very much. That was wonderful. I could have listened to another hour. I'm sorry we didn't book you for 2 hours. And having that additional guest speaker show up briefly, that was special too. I think participants are welcome to ask questions, put questions in the chat. I was going to ask, you mentioned that sort of there are other parts of the world where the SDGs are more, people are more familiar with them or are more aware of them. I'm wondering, have you seen anything in your experience in the States that sort of does that? You showed that one poster board of the elementary school teacher who did the SDGs with her classroom. Have you seen other examples of that kind of work?
Yes. Yes, thanks for that question. So there is a growing, really global movement of teachers who are using these goals, right? This isn't something that I made up. I can't take any credit for that. There is this movement of teachers around the world, including in the United States, who are using the SDGs in their classrooms in different ways. So for those of you who are on Twitter, the hashtag #TeachSDG gets a lot of, you can see a lot of this stuff. There's also a couple of really interesting organizations that do these global SDG projects where they pair classrooms together. They give you kind of a set curriculum and you work through them over the course of 6 weeks. I think it's called, I want to say it's called Project Goals or the Goal Project, but I can find that out and send that information to Carmen to add to the resources that she's going to share with you all, because that's a really great way to get connected with other teachers in the US and around the world who are doing this work. Danielle just said in the chat that there's this great website called The World's Largest Lesson. Absolutely. So that is a UN website that has lesson plans and materials for all the goals. They also, the UN, actually, I can put a link to this too. The UN has their own SDG book club, and every month they release the names of a couple of the names of a couple of books aligned with the goal. So I will make sure to share that information with you. And I mean, shameless plug, but my office does some of this work around the SDGs in particular. So I'm happy to share with you all some of our events too. But you know, we have a couple of minutes. I'm happy to answer more questions. I would love to hear if you were able to read the books, what you thought of them, or your own ideas of how you might bring them into the classroom.
It's quite difficult to moderate questions at the moment. So I did have I might just follow up a little bit on my previous question, which is, have you seen, have any of you seen examples of, let's say, schools working like across the curriculum on SDGs? Because they are so interconnected, but they, you know, you could do something in an economics classroom connected to something else, biology. So I don't know if anyone's seen anything like that.
I can speak to that a little bit. I co-teach a class called Global Sustainability with, I'm a Spanish teacher, a high school Spanish teacher, and I co-teach it with an AP Environmental Science teacher. So they get the curriculum for the AP Environmental Science, and then we put it into practice in Spanish. But then we work on projects in the community with clients. So for example, we do bilingual podcasts. I teach out in Waukesha County, so we do the podcast for the Waukesha County Green Team. So the students choose topics based on the UN SDGs and create their podcasts. So and bilingual is important because it gives equal access of information to more folks. So we work on community projects like that.
That is awesome. And so I think, you know, what I love about the literature aspect, right, is it's another tie to an English class, and it shows, I really, one of my favorite things about teaching with the goals is being able to see how these issues, you know, how they manifest on the ground, right? So if you're, I don't know, studying, you said biology, so I'm going to assume, or something sciencey, I'm going to assume like life on land, or, you know, one of the environmental goals, but you can still explore, like, what does it look like through literature? You know, how does pollution impact people's daily lives? I mean, I'm an anthropologist by training. That's the piece that I really love, is like, what are people's experiences? So that's something that is, yeah, that's that.
For that class, I was just going to add, we also read the book, Connecting the Literature piece. It's a book by a Spanish writer, and it's called The Seagull and the Cat That Taught It How to Fly. But it's a book in Spanish, so it's taking it from the perspective of animals and how they're affected by pollution.
That is so cool. That's awesome. Karen wrote 2 comments. One, that the girl with the loud voice is on her nightstand and she can't wait to get to it. I can't wait for you to get to it either. I loved that book. It is like, I don't know if others read it yet, but it is, I just tore through it. It is so easy to read. It is so engaging. It's just, it's great. It's got a happy ending. It's a tough read, right? Like, this girl goes through really difficult things in her life, but it's so good and it's so well written. And it's written in this like Nigerian pidgin. So it's just fascinating to read. And then Karen also said that her German teacher works with the World Affairs teacher on collaborative projects related to the goals. Awesome.
Maybe a last call for questions, comments, anything you wish to share?
So I don't know if you've, Carmen is, or someone is going to be sharing with you some resources after the fact, I believe. And in there is a book list of other books related to Goal 4 that you can use. But I can also share with Carmen to share with you book lists for the other goals too, if those are of interest. Because there are just amazing picture books, young adult books that touch on these topics. And I think the picture books are so powerful and don't only have to be used at the elementary level. I bring in picture books to my college kids sometimes, and I think it's such a great way to get them engaged, right? And to again show that life experience, and everyone likes being read to sometimes.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to ask everyone to join me in thanking you, Dr. Cohen, for a wonderful presentation.